Welcome, everyone. Today we're going to talk about building web apps in minutes with one of my favorite products that has just been released at Build 2020. And I'm joined today by Daria Grigorio, who's going to help us with some of the Q&A. So please make sure to submit all of your questions. And at the end of the session, we're going to spend some time to actually answer them. All right, so let's start with a story that probably sounds familiar to a lot of you out there. You're a developer and you've got this really great idea for building an application that helps connect people who need groceries with those who can provide it. And you write code, that's what you do, and you host your code in GitHub, and you expect that when you make a change in your code, there's some kind of CI/CD setup that will deploy your application automatically on every single push. And then your app probably needs some data, and you might want to set up some APIs, maybe using serverless and Azure functions. And so your app is now published, and you've got your data with your APIs, and you need to connect these two. How do you make sure that you connect them and your apps can talk securely even when they're running on two different servers and different ports? And what about setting up SSL? If security is a concern to you, which absolutely should, you definitely want this. You want to get a certificate, and very likely you'll also want to set up a custom domain for your website so that your users can easily find you on the web. Now, thinking of security, we also want to set up authentication, and we want to make sure that our users actually have the proper security roles so they can use our application whenever they want with different types of functionality. And finally, we do want global scale so we can reach everybody everywhere, regardless of where they are located in the world. Ooh, that's a lot of things that we need to take care of. As a web developer, I would absolutely love to be able to code my app, push it to GitHub, and then have everything else taken care of for me. And so if we take a step back and we think about as web developers, what do we do? Well, as a web developer, you might be creating your application using Angular, or maybe you're writing React applications, or maybe your choice is Svelte or Vue.js. All of these tools have fundamentally changed the way we build web applications. Now we have to run a build process on the client side. Previously, we used to be able to basically tell our server, hey, here's our application, build it, send my pages back to the client side. But now we have to run this npm run build command, which will then generate in the background a series of assets for us, which will then send back to the client. And that's actually going to help us deploy and run our application. And we want these assets to be deployed to our website and light up our application. So it just works. Now, wouldn't it be great if we could do just that? And I'm delighted today to introduce to you a product that we've worked really hard on and we're excited to release. That's Azure Static Web Apps, where basically you write code, you push it to GitHub, and we take care of everything else for you. My name is Simona Kotin, and over the next few minutes, we're going to basically show you how to build a static web app in minutes. But what are static web apps? They're going to let you build and host a static web app in the cloud, integrate with authentication and authorization, and it's going to pull together our APIs using Azure Functions if you choose to deploy your APIs. One thing to note here is that basically when we're deploying these applications, we have the option of creating and pushing our APIs together with our websites, but we don't have to. And everything else is just going to work because we're going to use CI/CD through GitHub Actions workflow. So how does this work behind the scenes, you might be wondering? Well, you start with some kind of GitHub repository where you've got your application, let's say your Angular or React or even Gatsby or Next.js or Next.js, and you put it, let's say, in a app folder. And then you have your API as well, and that's in your API folder. And you're going to make a PR or push that code to GitHub, which will then fire off a GitHub action. And then this is when Azure Static Web Apps actually kicks into gear. This is where your application's content, your static assets, your HTML and JavaScript and CSS, they get deployed to a server. And so do your APIs using Azure Functions. And collectively, this is your web application, which is then available to your users around the world. And of course, you can take my word for it, but better yet, let me just go ahead and show you a demo of how all of this works together. We'll start off with how do you actually build your application and get your static assets up to the cloud. Then we're going to add an API to our application. And finally, we're going to come back a little bit later and we're going to look at authentication and authorization. But first, let's start where we all feel a lot more comfortable, very comfortable and very familiar. This is where our code is, and this is on GitHub. So I'm going to switch back to my browser here, and I'm going to go into GitHub. And this is where I've created an application, build-shop at home. And I have a couple applications here, actually. I have my Angular application, I have my React application, my Svelte and Vue app, and all of these are actually four different implementations of the exact same application. So what do we have to do in order to deploy this code and this repository to Azure Static Web Apps? Well, the first step is that we go into the Azure portal, and right here at the top, I'm going to search for static web apps, which are now in preview for all of us to try. And then I'm going to click Add. And this is going to take me to a screen where I can enter a few things. I'm going to start off by telling our Azure Static Web App that we want to deploy to this resource group called Build. And this is like a folder in the cloud for all of your resources. Then let's go ahead and copy this name from GitHub. So that's build-shop at home. And this is the name of our static web app. Next, I want to choose a region, and please don't be fooled by the fact that I've chosen Western Europe here. This is going to be our home base, but actually your application, your production application is going to be deployed and replicated globally. So this is just the home base for our functions apps as well as our pre-production environment. Then I'm going to authenticate with GitHub. And this is when I'm going to be asked for my organization. I'm going to have to choose my repository here. So I'm going to paste quickly here, build-shop at home. And then I'm going to deploy the master branch. Next step is actually one of the most important ones, where we have to tell Azure Static Web Apps where to look for our code and for our application. So the first thing that we need to say here is that where our app location is. And I want to deploy actually the Angular app. In this session, you're going to see your Angular code being deployed. Then for our API, let's say that we have a folder called functions, and that's where our Azure functions are going to be deployed. And finally, we want to tell Azure Static Web Apps where is it that it should look for our public assets. So whenever we build our application, that's going to generate a series of artifacts or a bundle that's then going to be deployed to the cloud. And this is available in dist/Angular app in the case of Angular. So I'm going to click here, review and create, and this is going to give me the opportunity to validate that everything I've entered is correct. So click create. And then what happens in the background is that Azure is going to go and create all of the resources that are required for our Azure Static Web App to be deployed in the cloud, as well as create a GitHub action into our repository. So I'm going to click here, go to resource. And there's a couple things happening here on this page. First of all, we can see this wonderful message saying, thank you for using Azure Static Web App. I'm hoping that all of you are going to see that soon as well. And we have not received any content for your site yet. Click here to check the status of your GitHub action runs. Now, this is a key message that is telling us that the GitHub action is still running. So the public assets that we are then going to display to our users are actually not yet in Azure Static Web Apps, but we can go ahead and check out the status of that GitHub action by clicking this link. The other thing that I want to show you, and this is one of my favorite things with Azure Static Web Apps, it actually generates for us a random URL. So in this case, our URL is proud dessert. I'm going to choose to pronounce it as dessert because I love desserts. And this is where our application will be available at in just a few minutes. All right, so now let's click on this link here and it's going to take us into our GitHub action run. And another thing that I love about Azure Static Web Apps is that we have this button here that allows us to create a status badge. I love status badges and I love adding them to READMEs. So as soon as we finish with this talk, I'm going to go ahead and copy the status badge here and add it to my README. But going into our action here, so we have the run, and this is an indicator that we are now running in progress our action. And if we look at the workflow file, there's a couple things happening here. So we can see that the file itself starts with Azure Static Web Apps, and then it adds our application's name here that was randomly generated. And this workflow file is actually a file that is going to live in your repository. And once GitHub Azure has sent this file to us, it's going to be available for you to customize it any way you wanted to. And we're listening to changes on the master branch and any pull requests that you might be creating. And then a couple of things are important here. As we're building and deploying your static assets, there's these three things that you should already recognize. So we have the app location, and this is what we've entered in the portal as well, where we're saying that, hey, deploy my app from the Angular app folder. Then our API location is functions, and then we're saying where our artifacts location is. So when I jump back into my GitHub repository, we can see here that we have the Angular app folder. And for those of you that are creating Angular applications, you will be familiar with this code. Then when we go back, we can see that we actually have our API deployed in an API folder rather than the functions folder. So we're going to have to go and fix this in just a second. But going back to our run here, we can see that it's still in progress. And we can have a look at some of the steps that have completed. So these green check marks are basically visual cues that tell us, hey, this step has completed successfully. And if anything was to happen and we got an error, then it would be a red cross. And we can see that our build and deploy step has already completed as well, which is awesome. And at the end of the logs here, it's going to also list the URL where we can test our application. But let's go back to the portal and copy it from there. I'm going to click this button here, open a new tab, and then paste in the URL. And ta-da! We have our shop at home Angular application that has just been deployed for us. And the first thing that I want us to look at is my list of products. When I click here, we're going to see immediately that the message that we're seeing is that it's not found, and that's expected because our APIs have not been deployed because we gave the wrong location for that. The other thing that I want to show you is when we look here in the URL bar, we can see that our connection is secure and we actually have a valid certificate that has been created for us and deployed for us. And then, of course, we have the proud dessert URL just here, but most of the times we want to be able to set up a custom domain. And I've already deployed a production application for us to look at that has this custom URL, www.shopathome.xyz. And this is our final application. And the way I set this up is going back into the Azure portal, we can see here that we have a custom domain page where if we go there, we can see that I already set up this custom domain. So you might be wondering, what do I have to do, Simona, in order to deploy this new application and create a custom domain for it? So going into our applications Azure portal, then we can see here in the custom domain page, I can actually click add, and this is going to give me two straightforward tasks or steps that I need to take in order to set up my custom domain. And the first one is that I need to tell my my DNS provider that, hey, this is where I want to point my custom domain to. I want to point it to proud dessert and then random number. And then the other thing that we need to do is also validate that this is actually, we own this custom domain and we're pointing it from here. And that's it. That's all you need to do to set up your custom domains. Awesome. And going back to our application, which is just here, proud dessert. The other thing that I want to show you, I'm here on the products page, and watch what happens when I try to refresh this page. It's giving us a 404 and not found. And that's because of a thing that's also known for front-end developers as a fallback route. So when we look at the URL here, we can see that we want to list the products that we have available, and we understand that as a front-end developer as being client-side routing, but our server, what we'll try to do is find this path on the server side, and clearly it doesn't find that. So what we need to do is actually add a fallback route and tell it that, hey, whenever you cannot find the route, just redirect to index.html and everything will be taken care of for you. So let's go into our VS Code. And the first thing that we want to do is pull changes. We want to fix those issues. And I'm going to run git pull here. And this is going to bring us the GitHub workflow that we've seen earlier. So our Azure Static Web Apps Proud Dessert. And this is where we want to fix our API location. So as opposed to deploying the location from the functions folder, we want to deploy it from the API folder, which is available right here. And we can see that we have a series of functions that we've created. Then the next thing that we want to do is add our fallback route. And to do that, we're going into our Angular application, into source, into the assets folder. This is the folder that is going to display our public assets that we have for our application. And here we create the routes.json file. This is a file that tells Azure Static Web Apps any of the route customizations that we have to do. So I'm going to add this quick snippet here that tells us that whenever you find a route that you're not able to identify, then serve index.html, basically defer routing to client-side application. Okay, so now I want to create a new branch. Let's say that that's our API branch. And then I want to make sure to commit these changes. Let's say we want to fix the fallback and API. And I'm going to commit this change and push it to GitHub. Going back into our browser, into our GitHub repository, we can see our commit has already been created here. And then we need to create a pull request. And what this will do, it will trigger a new GitHub action run. Remember, we are listening for all the pushes and changes to our repository. So now we can see that a new GitHub action run has started. And we know that this will take about 3 minutes, so we're not going to look into this one, but let's go ahead and look at our production application. I've already created a pre-production environment for our application and sent in a PR with all of those fixes that we mentioned earlier. And you can see here, when I go into the portal, if I go into the environments page, we can see that I have my master branch running our Angular application. And then in our staging environment, I actually have my Vue.js branch running. And if I go in and browse there, the first thing that I want to show you is as soon as I navigate to my list URL, then we're going to load the data, and we can see that we're now retrieving data from our APIs. And then the other thing that we wanted to fix was the fallback route. So when I go into refreshing this page, we can see that now our routing is handled by our client-side application, which is awesome. And again, the reason why I created a PR was because I didn't want to test my changes directly in production, but rather I wanted to use a pre-production environment and make sure that everything that I'm seeing is the right thing and I made the right changes here. Amazing. So we've seen a lot of things here. We've seen how to reach global scale by deploying our application to the cloud. We've seen how we can set up custom domains as well as connect automatically our APIs. And then we've seen how by pushing changes through PRs, we're actually kicking off a CI/CD pipeline that will automatically deploy our changes. Now, the next thing that I want us to look into is authentication and authorization. And by default, Azure Static Web Apps actually supports 5 different authentication providers. So you can have your users tell us who they are by authenticating with either Twitter, GitHub, Azure Active Directory, Facebook, or Google, any of the 5. But what if in your organization you actually don't want to enable all of these authentication providers? What if you want to maybe block some of them? If I go back into my VS Code instance, um, in order to block some of those authentication providers, we can go back into our routes.json file. This is a very powerful file. And then in order to block certain authentication providers, what we can do is basically say that, hey, whenever you receive a request at this particular route, just return 404. And then we talked a bit about authorization as well, and the ability to restrict certain parts of our application to certain types of users. We might be in a situation where we want to have a series of users that only have read-only access, and others that have the ability to edit and update records into our application. And this is how we define how our users have access on our server side. So what we are saying here is that whenever we navigate to the API discounts route, we want that all users to be preferred. Otherwise, they're unauthorized. And this is a role that we define ourselves, and I'm going to show you in a second how to do that. The same is true for whenever we're navigating to any of the API CRUD operations, well, actually only the write and update ones. We want our users to be in a preferred role and have that ability to edit our product. And finally, everyone that is authenticated can actually go ahead and visit our list of products. And let's go into our production application again and see how that looks like. So currently we can see that we have the list of all 5 authentication providers. And when I go into Facebook, we can see that we have this 404 not found page. You can customize this page however you want to, but basically we're currently blocking access to this provider. Then when I go and log in with Twitter, we can see that I have access to my list of data, which means that I'm authenticated. And then when I try to navigate to my discounts page, we can see that we're unauthorized. So let's see why that is happening. I'm in my Azure portal. I can now go into the role management page. And this is where immediately we can see that Simona Co, that's authenticated with the GitHub authentication provider, is already in a preferred role. Awesome. And if I wanted to invite new users into our application to have that preferred role, then I can click on the invite page here. And this is where I can choose the authentication provider, let's say Twitter, and then the user handle, the domain, and then this is where I tell it, hey, this user, we want it to be in the preferred role. And then I can generate a link that I can use as an invite for that particular user. But we already know that Simona Co is in a preferred role. So I'm going to go ahead and log out from the Twitter account and log in with the GitHub page, GitHub username. And now we can see that our discounts are available alongside our list of products and our homepage. Amazing. So we've seen a lot. We've seen how we can go from our code, make changes to our code and push them in PRs, have automatic deployments happening when we change our code, connect to our APIs, set up routing, custom domains, authentication, authorization, and reach global scale. All of this is available for you today in Azure Static Web Apps. And the key points here are that you get a single unified workflow with GitHub Actions that you can customize however you want to. You also get support for serverless APIs powered by Azure Functions. And finally, you are able to easily integrate your authentication and authorization functionality so that we can give custom roles to our users and access. And if you wanted to try this yourself, All of these links will be the links to our application and to our docs will be available for all of you out there. But basically, you can check out our Microsoft Docs and read more in-depth explanations of some of the features that I've showed you here. And then we also have an interactive learning experience for all of you to try and deploy your applications using either Angular or React or Vue.js or Gatsby or Nuxt, your choice to build any of these. All right, I think that's all. Thank you so much for listening in, and I'm going to hand it over to Daria right now so we can answer some of your questions.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for engaging with us with your questions, and thank you, Simona, for a fantastic presentation. We have a few common questions that we see here, and I'm going to start with the most common, and that is, do you integrate with Azure DevOps? Right now, in the first iteration for our public preview, we did not integrate with Azure DevOps. We are definitely investigating options, and we appreciate the feedback. The next set of questions that we see is about how does this work, and especially how does this work similar or different from app service. So those were a couple of different questions that I merged into one. So with static web apps, we actually honor the architecture of hosting static content and geo-distributing that static content. There is no server-side rendering, no web servers involved. You should definitely use app service if you require a web server or server-side rendering. The next set of questions are related to custom domains. So here, a common one is, do you support root domains? And the answer is that right now, we don't support that out of the box. We're definitely interested in pursuing that. But we have a great workaround that was linked from our documentation on custom domains. So please check that out, and hopefully that should address your scenario. Other questions are related to the structure of the repo. And I just wanted to point out, like Simona called out earlier, that is customizable because you have direct access to your workflow file. So with that available in your repo, you can tell us about the location of your static content, the location of your API, and you can also customize and build commands. I'm looking for a few more questions. And another one is about issues, in this case, particularly with the Gatsby website. So I just wanted to point out that for any issues that you encounter, we have a GitHub repo. It is Azure Static Web App. And we definitely would love to look into anything that you encounter. We have a few more questions here about environment configuration. So Simona, do you want to talk about that, app settings?
Yeah, of course. So when you need to customize your application keys, let's say if you're using Azure Functions and you want to maybe set up your application insights key, or maybe you want to set up your key vault key, you can easily go into the configuration setting there, and you can set up your keys right there.
Thank you. We are right now being told that we're out of time, and we really appreciate all the questions. Please keep them coming. Please open issues in our GitHub repo and allow us to keep engaging with you and receive your feedback and address it.